Welcome to the Philosophical Odysseys podcast.
Great to be here.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into an incredible stack of source material, and the goal is to completely reframe how you process the information overload of modern life.
Yeah, it's a pretty ambitious goal for today.
It is. We are unpacking Arthur Schopenhauer's piercing critique of science, specialization, and abstract thought. Specifically, we are diving into a collection titled Science and Wisdom.
Right, or as it appears in the meticulously translated Turkish edition we're using, Bilim ve Bilgelik.
Exactly. That was translated by Ahmet Aydozan and published by Say Yayınları back in 2014, I believe.
Yeah, 2014. And it's just a phenomenal curation of his thought. I mean, Aydozan has pulled together excerpts that essentially function as a survival guide for the intellect.
A survival guide is a great way to put it. We are going beyond the standard textbook summaries of Schopenhauer here. We're looking directly at his arguments regarding the severe limitations of scientific reductionism.
And the trap of hyperspecialization, which is huge.
Huge, and what he believed was the true, singular task of philosophy.
Now, we should probably set a little baseline for the listener, just the absolute basics.
Right, okay. So born in 1788 in Danzig.
Yes, and died in 1860 in Frankfurt.
And we are really zeroing in on the ideas presented in two major works mentioned in the sources. His 1813 dissertation, The Fourfold Root of the Principle of Sufficient Reason.
Which is a mouthful.
It is. And his massive 1818 magnum opus, The World as Will and Representation.
And even though we're skipping the deep biographical dive, we do need to establish the foundational lens through which he views all these critiques.
The two pillars.
Right. Representation and will. His entire system is built on them. Idealism tells us that the world we experience is a representation.
Meaning it's a construct.
Exactly. A construct of our sensory apparatus and our cognitive faculties. We do not interact with the universe as it actually is.
We interact with the universe as our minds render it. It's like...
It's an interface.
Yeah, we are locked inside a biological VR headset. We see colors, we hear sounds, we feel time passing, but that's just the dashboard.
That is exactly it. And beneath that dashboard, the actual engine driving the entire vehicle, the thing in itself that exists completely independent of our perception, is what Schopenhauer calls the will.
The will.
Yes, this blind, relentless, striving energy. And it's a striving that lacks any ultimate purpose or final satisfaction.
Which is exactly why he arrives at his famous pessimism, right?
Precisely. If the fundamental reality of existence is an endless, hungry craving, then every effort inherently contains pain. Every effort contains struggle and a profound sense of lack.
So life just becomes this pendulum.
A pendulum swinging endlessly between the suffering of unfulfilled desire on one side and the agonizing boredom that sets in the very moment a desire is temporarily met on the other.
It's a beautifully grim diagnosis.
It really is.
But, the reason we're doing this deep dive isn't to just wallow in pessimism.
No, not at all.
Schopenhauer actually offers a toolkit for navigating this. He believed that the intellect, when used correctly, can pierce through that relentless striving.
Through deep philosophical contemplation or art or asceticism, it can provide a momentary escape from the demands of that will.
And that pursuit of intellectual clarity is what we are unpacking today. He's trying to teach us how to actually think.
Rather than just mechanically process data.
Which brings us right to you, the listener. Think about your average Tuesday at work.
Oh yeah, the Tuesday slump.
Have you ever been staring at a wall of code or a complex financial model or just the endless logistical details of a project and realized you feel entirely disconnected from the actual purpose of what you're doing?
You're buried so deep in the micro details.
Right, the how and the what, and the macro meaning, the actual why, that's just completely evaporated.
You're executing tasks flawlessly, but the reality of the whole endeavor just feels absurd or empty.
And that feeling of being overwhelmed by granular details while starving for overarching meaning, that isn't just a personal failing.
No, it's not just modern corporate burnout.
It is the exact epistemological crisis that Schopenhauer diagnosed over a century ago.
And it's the very crisis of modern science that the preparatory text in our source material addresses head on.
Okay, let's unpack this. The introductory material we're looking at includes a brilliant excerpt from Stuart A. Kauffman.
Yes, which really sets the stage.
It diagnoses a massive modern intellectual disease, the trap of reductionism, and Kauffman uses this devastating metaphor from Greek mythology.
Procrustes.
Yes, he calls modern science Procrustes' iron bed.
Procrustes, for those who might not recall the specific myth, was a rogue smith and a bandit in ancient Greece. He offered hospitality to passing strangers.
Sounds nice at first.
Right, he would invite them to sleep in his special iron bed.
Yeah.
But there was a horrific catch.
He was obsessed with everything fitting perfectly.
Exactly. If the guest was too short for the bed, he would physically stretch them on a rack until their joints pocked and they fit the bed.
And if they were too tall?
He would amputate their legs. He'd chop them off to make them fit the exact dimensions of the iron frame.
It is an incredibly violent, graphic metaphor for what modern science has spent the last few centuries doing to the universe.
It really frames the problem perfectly.
We have this bed of scientific reductionism. It's the dogma that absolutely everything, from the formation of galaxies to the feeling of falling in love, can ultimately be explained solely by the interactions of basic, fundamental subatomic particles.
And if a phenomenon like human consciousness or historical meaning or moral agency doesn't fit that purely physicalist model,
We just amputate it, we chop it off and say it's an illusion.
the text traces this modern obsession back to the Enlightenment. It specifically points to the early 19th century French scholar Simon-Pierre Laplace as the ultimate architect of this worldview.
Laplace's demon.
Yes, Laplace formulated a thought experiment that has haunted philosophy and science ever since.
It's the ultimate, terrifying, supreme intellect.
Laplace posited that if there were a supreme intellect, a demon, that knew the precise positions, velocities, and forces acting upon every single particle in the entire universe at one specific frozen moment in time.
That's a lot of data.
An unimaginable amount. But if it had that data and the computational power to process it, then for that intellect, nothing would be uncertain.
The entire future of the universe would be laid out.
The future and the past. It would be entirely present before its eyes. The universe would be a perfectly calculable, deterministic clockwork mechanism.
It's the ultimate fantasy of the reductionist, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
If you understand the fundamental gears of physics and you know where they all are, the universe is just a machine running a predictable script. There are zero surprises.
But the text highlights the psychological and philosophical cost of this worldview. It brings in the Nobel laureate physicist Steven Weinberg to really hammer the point home.
What did Weinberg say?
Weinberg articulated the triumph of reductionism. He said that all our explanatory arrows ultimately point down to physics.
Point down. Let's trace that.
Sure, if you ask why a society behaves a certain way, the arrow points down to human psychology.
Okay, makes sense.
Then psychology points down to biology. Biology points down to biochemistry. Biochemistry points to chemistry. And chemistry points directly down to fundamental physics.
The arrows always point down. We're always looking for the smaller, more fundamental gear to explain the bigger movement.
But Weinberg, despite being a massive champion of this physicalist reality, drew a chilling, brutally honest conclusion from it.
A famous quote from the text.
Yes. He famously stated that the more we know about the universe, the more we understand its physical laws, the more meaningless it seems.
The more meaningless it seems. That is the exact consequence of Laplace's demon.
It's unavoidable.
Because if Laplace is right, and the universe is just particles following strict mathematical trajectories since the Big Bang, where is there any room for meaning?
There isn't any.
Where is the purpose? The universe isn't going anywhere intentionally. It's just unfolding a giant mathematical equation.
And this inevitably leads to an existential crisis. The text draws a direct, unbroken line from Laplace's physical determinism to the profound despair of the 20th century existentialists.
Figures like Jean-Paul Sartre or Albert Camus.
Exactly. They were essentially waking up in Laplace's universe,
A universe consisting entirely of moving particles.
where every single event is either strictly determined by prior physical causes or, at best, governed by completely random quantum chance at the margins.
And here's the kicker for the listener. Neither determinism nor random chance allows for human agency.
Neither one.
If I choose to sacrifice my own comfort to help a stranger, Laplace's universe tells me that wasn't a moral choice.
No, it was just the inevitable pre-calculated firing of neurons in your brain,
Dictated by chemical reaction.
dictated by physics.
In that framework, there is no objective value, no inherent meaning, and zero room for true agency.
The existentialists were grappling with the horror of an absurd universe. They were desperately trying to construct subjective meaning in a void that physics told them was entirely indifferent.
They felt the crushing weight of their choices being reduced to mere accidents of physics. When you strip away agency, the moral weight of human action just evaporates.
It's a devastatingly bleak place for the intellect to land.
But the Kaufman excerpt in our source material doesn't just leave us in this pit of despair, thankfully.
No, it offers a way out. It argues that we have been hypnotized by a very specific historical success story.
What the text calls the Galilean spell.
This is a crucial historical diagnosis. The spell began with Galileo Galilei. He conducted his legendary experiments, rolling bronze billiard balls down inclined planes to prove the laws of motion.
He brilliantly demonstrated that the distance traveled by a falling object is directly proportional to the square of the time elapsed.
It was elegant. He was mathematically perfect, and it was undeniably true.
It was the birth of modern physics. It proved that the universe could be written in the language of mathematics.
Yes, and that success paved the way directly to Isaac Newton's Principia, which seemed to unlock the very mind of God through the laws of gravity and motion.
The success of this method was intoxicating.
So unprecedented that it cast a literal spell over the entire Western intellectual tradition. The Galilean spell is the deeply entrenched, almost unconscious belief that absolutely everything in the universe must be governed by strict, universal natural laws.
From the orbit of Jupiter to the evolution of a biological ecosystem to the unfolding of a political revolution.
We assume it's all under the same rigid laws.
It's the assumption that just because we found the equation for gravity, there must be an equation for human history, or an equation for biological creativity. We just haven't found it yet, so we have to keep producing things until we do.
What's fascinating here is how the text shatters this assumption by introducing the concept of emergence, particularly in the realm of biology.
It points at a glaring blind spot in the reductionist view.
Life, agency, and value are not illusions. They are real, observable phenomena. The biosphere has existed and evolved on this planet for roughly 3.8 billion years.
And it has produced an unimaginably complex web of species, behaviors, and ecosystems.
And you cannot predict a jaguar, or a coral reef, or the Renaissance just by looking at the initial state of the subatomic particles.
The math just doesn't work that way.
Exactly. The text argues that while the biosphere absolutely does not violate the laws of physics, a jaguar is still bound by gravity, obviously, it is not dictated by them in a way that allows for prediction.
The evolution of life and human social and economic history are partly lawless.
They are ceaselessly radically creative. This is emergence. The living organism, the society, the economy becomes something fundamentally different with its own top-down causal power.
A power that cannot be deduced merely by summing up the physical parts.
Right. So Procrustes is trying to chop off the legs of biology and history to make them fit into the bed of physics.
And Schopenhauer's sources are saying, stop chopping, the legs are real, the creativity of the universe is real.
To contextualize this massive intellectual rift, the text draws on a profound historical observation from Paul Johnson's History of the Jews.
Now, let me jump in here real quick for the listener. As we navigate this next part, we want to be clear that we are presenting this purely impartially.
Entirely impartially.
It's presented strictly as a historical and academic observation from the source text, examining how different ancient cultures shaped our modern cognitive frameworks.
Right, we are looking at this as a genealogy of ideas. We're strictly detailing how the text argues these traditions influence Western philosophy. No endorsements, just reporting the text.
Exactly. So according to the text citing Johnson, what did the Hebraic tradition provide?
The ancient Hebraic tradition provided the Western world with its foundational concept of linear history. It introduced the idea of forward progress, of a narrative unfolding through time.
And crucially, historical agency.
Yes, it viewed reality as an active, unfolding story filled with moral weight and unpredictable human choices.
Contrast that with the ancient Greeks, who provided the Hellenic tradition in the text.
The Greeks gave us the pursuit of geometry, of logic, and of universal, static, unchanging natural laws.
They were looking for the eternal equations that govern the cosmos beneath the messy surface of time and history.
So the crisis we find ourselves in today, this tension between Laplace's demon and the reality of biological and historical creativity, is essentially the collision of these two massive traditions.
Immanuel Kant famously tried to navigate this very rift, didn't he?
He did. The rift between pure, abstract, deterministic reason and practical, lived moral life. The text suggests that we have let the Hellenic pursuit of natural laws completely bulldoze the Hebraic understanding of an unpredictable, historically contingent, meaningful narrative.
We have to unite them. We have to acknowledge that gravity is real, but so is human agency.
The text brings in two phenomenal quotes to anchor this necessity. First, it quotes Søren Kierkegaard, the father of existentialism.
He said that we live forward.
We live forward. We do not live life as a solved mathematical equation. We live into an open, unfolding mystery.
And then it quotes Friedrich Nietzsche.
who observed that we live as if we know. We navigate this unpredictable reality with the necessary courage, acting with agency even though we can never fully logically reduce or predict the outcome.
We are participants in a creative universe, not just passive observers of a clockwork mechanism.
And recognizing that is the very first step out of the reductionist trap.
Which transitions us brilliantly into Schopenhauer's razor-sharp critique of the academic and scientific communities of his day.
Oh, he did not hold back.
Not at all, because if the universe is this grand, unfolding, emergent mystery, how do scientists actually go about studying it? Schopenhauer argues that they completely lose the plot.
They get entirely lost in the weeds.
And he gives us one of the most vivid, enduring analogies for scientific specialization I have ever encountered. He calls out the Genoa watchmakers.
It is a profound indictment of the hyper-specialized academic culture, an indictment that is arguably 100 times more relevant today than it was in the 19th century.
Paint the picture for us.
Schopenhauer observes that in the realm of specialized scholarship, people become obsessively, almost pathologically focused on one minuscule component of reality. He likens them to the artisans in the watchmaking industry of Genoa.
Back when watches were entirely mechanical and incredibly complex.
Right. In this highly stratified manufacturing system, one artisan spends his entire life making nothing but the tiny brass gears. Day in, day out, just cutting gears.
Another artisan in a different shop makes only the delicate hairsprings.
A third makes only the intricate chains.
They are absolute, undisputed masters of their tiny fragments of the watch. I mean, the gear maker can tell you everything about the metallurgy, the torque, the friction of that specific gear.
But if you hand all those perfect parts back to the gear maker and ask him to build a functioning watch, he has absolutely no idea what to do.
He can't do it.
Exactly. None of them possess the knowledge of the whole. None of them understand how the mechanism actually functions to keep time.
Schopenhauer uses this to contrast the specialized scientist, the cog maker, with the true philosopher.
The philosopher, he argues, must be the master watchmaker.
The one who steps back.
Yes. The philosopher steps back, surveys all these disparate, isolated disciplines, the physics, the biology, the history, the psychology, and synthesizes them to create a coherent whole that actually has meaning and movement.
The philosopher might not be able to forge a gear with the same microscopic precision as the lifetime gear maker, but the gear is useless without the watchmaker to place it in the movement.
Schopenhauer follows this up with the second, equally resonant analogy in the text. He compares the philosopher to an orchestra conductor standing at the podium.
The conductor's the only one who doesn't actually make a sound.
Right. The conductor might not be able to play the violin with the dizzying virtuosity of the concertmaster. They might not be able to hit the high notes on their French horn as flawlessly as the principal horn player.
But the specialized musicians are often trapped in their own single line of sheet music.
They know when to come in, they know their own dynamics, but they're focused entirely on their part. The conductor, however, has the full score.
The conductor must know the rules, the capabilities, the limitations, and the essence of every single instrument on that stage.
Their job is not to play the instrument, but to harmonize all the individual sciences. The woodwinds of biology, the brass of physics, the strings of history, to produce the actual symphony of wisdom.
Without the conductor, you just have 100 people making highly skilled, specialized noise.
The text underscores this by referencing the intellectual architecture of the past. It mentions the medieval philosopher John Scotus Ergina and the ancient Pythagoreans.
They had a different way of categorizing things.
They possessed a taxonomy of knowledge that we have largely lost today. They grouped all the individual, highly specialized sciences under the broad Latin term scientia.
Scientia.
But they placed philosophy in a distinct, elevated category opposite to them, sapientia.
Scientia gives you the raw facts. It tells you how the gear is made. Sapientia, which translates directly to wisdom, tells you what the facts actually mean. It tells you what time it is.
But Schopenhauer knows that pursuing sapientia is incredibly difficult. It requires immense synthesis, courage, and a willingness to step outside the safe, comfortable boundaries of a narrow discipline.
And because it is so difficult, many academics simply abandon it.
To describe this failure, Schopenhauer dusts off a brilliant, biting analogy from antiquity. It's attributed variously in the text to Aristippus, Ariston, or beyond.
It is a harsh critique of scholars who abandon true philosophy for easier, more granular, lesser sciences.
He compares them to Penelope's suitors in Homer's Odyssey.
This might be my favorite analogy in the entire deep dive. It is so utterly ruthless.
It is incredibly sharp. The analogy points out that Penelope's suitors swarmed her palace, desperately wanting to win Penelope herself. In this metaphor, Penelope represents the ultimate prize,
Yeah.
true philosophy, the highest level of wisdom and understanding.
But Penelope is cunning. She is demanding, and she is ultimately unattainable for these mediocre men.
Because they were unable to attain her, unable to ascend to that high level of philosophical truth, their desire devolved. They ultimately settled for sleeping with her maids instead.
They settled for the maids.
It's a brutal way to describe a scholar who sets out to understand the meaning of life, finds the grand philosophical questions too daunting, and decides instead to spend 40 years cataloging a very specific subspecies of lichen.
There is nothing inherently wrong with studying lichen. We need lichen experts.
Sure, but Schopenhauer is skewering the intellectual cowardice of confusing the maid for Penelope.
Which raises a profoundly important question for you, the listener. It is worth doing a brutal self-audit of your own life, your career trajectory, or your educational pursuits right now.
Ask yourself,
Hmm.
are you functioning as a general watchmaker?
Are you obsessively focused entirely on the microscopic tasks in front of you? Optimizing the supply chain, writing the code, balancing the daily ledger, without any concept of what the whole machine does?
Are you just settling for the maids because it's easier and safer than pursuing Penelope?
Or are you actively seeking the sapientia, the wisdom to understand how your specific, highly polished gears fit into the larger, grander machinery of your life and the human experience?
Schopenhauer is demanding that we step back from the workbench and look at the whole watch.
But how do we actually do that? How to pursue that wisdom without falling into another trap? Because here's where it gets really interesting.
He has a huge warning for us here.
Yes, Schopenhauer warns us that the moment we try to become the watchmaker, the biggest mistake we can make is to abandon reality and get lost in the clouds of abstract concepts.
This is a massive pivot in his critique. He moves from the sociology of science straight into his core epistemology, his theory of how we actually acquire knowledge.
And he views abstract concepts entirely differently than many of the prevailing philosophers of his day.
Especially the German idealists who came after Kant. He argues forcefully that concepts are not the origin of knowledge. They are merely the storage containers of knowledge.
They are the Tupperware of the mind, and you can't eat the Tupperware.
I love that. Exactly. He uses a far more classical analogy in the text, though. He says concepts are just the material of philosophy, in the exact same way that marble is just the material for a sculptor.
If a sculptor drags a massive, rough, uncarved block of marble into a gallery, points at it, and demands you weep at its beauty, you would call them a fraud.
The marble is absolutely necessary to create the statue, but the art, the truth, requires shaping that material based on a living vision.
Schopenhauer argues that building a philosophical system starting with abstract concepts is like trying to build a house from the roof down.
It is a fatal epistemological error to begin your inquiry with grand capitalized words like being the absolute substance or the infinite.
He thinks those words are basically empty.
Completely empty until filled. He insists that all true philosophy must start from perceptual reality. It must begin with our direct, lived, sensory, physical experience of the world as it presents itself to us.
You observe the world, you suffer the world, you perceive the mechanisms of reality.
And then you abstract those observations, draw conclusions, and store those hard-won conclusions in concepts. Concepts must always be the end product of a long process of perception. They can never be the starting point.
And when Schopenhauer sees his contemporaries doing it backwards, starting with concepts and ignoring reality, he completely takes the gloves off.
He was a notoriously fierce polemicist.
He starts calling out the intellectual hacks of his era by name.
In our source text, he sets up a stark contrast to illustrate this point. First, he praises the Scottish common-sense philosopher Thomas Reid.
He specifically points to Reid's essays on the powers of the human mind.
Right, as an excellent grounded explanation of how concepts actually function as tools of the mind rather than self-existing entities. But then he immediately juxtaposes Reid with another Scottish philosopher, Dugald Stewart.
And he absolutely obliterates Stewart.
He dismisses Stewart as a fundamentally shallow mind. Schopenhauer claims that Stewart gained his reputation not through intellectual merit, but entirely through nepotism, favoritism, and the political machinations of the academic establishment.
He is so repulsed by Stewart's abstraction-heavy, superficial writing that he explicitly instructs his readers that spending even a single hour reading Stewart's scribblings is a tragic waste of precious time. He's basically saying, burn the book, save your brain cells.
Pretty much. But his critique of the highly influential German theologian Friedrich Schleiermacher is even more revealing about how much Schopenhauer hated ungrounded abstraction.
Schleiermacher was an immensely prominent, powerful figure in the intellectual and religious circles of Berlin. He was basically a rock star theologian.
And Schopenhauer absolutely despised his methodology. The text notes how Schleiermacher would deliver these highly attended grand sermons at the Berlin Academy. But according to Schopenhauer, these sermons were agonizingly dull.
They bored everyone to tears.
And Schopenhauer diagnoses exactly why they were boring. He points out that Schleiermacher would consistently start his lectures by invoking massive, heavy abstract concepts like duty, virtue, and the highest good.
And he treated these words as if they were physical objects you could just hold in your hand. He treated them as given realities that required no further explanation.
That was the fatal flaw. Schleiermacher was building an intellectual castle entirely out of conceptual blueprints, without ever pouring a foundation in reality.
He completely bypassed the gritty, complex, often painful, lived human experience where these concepts actually have to be forged.
You cannot genuinely understand or communicate the concept of duty by defining it with other abstract words. You can only understand duty by observing the immense, terrifying struggles of real human beings making agonizing choices in perceptual reality.
If you want to know what virtue is, don't read a dictionary definition. Look at a person sacrificing their safety for someone else.
Schopenhauer concludes that people who philosophize entirely in this abstract realm induce a sickening and disgusting weariness in the reader or the listener.
You feel this weariness because you are essentially chewing on empty shells.
There is no nutritional value in a concept that isn't filled with perceptual reality. True wisdom requires abandoning the safety of the library, stepping out of the fortress of abstract words, and immersing yourself in the perceived physical world.
So if we can't build wisdom out of pure abstraction, how do our minds actually process reality? This brings us to a fascinating, highly technical breakdown of how Schopenhauer views the machinery of thought.
We are digging into his categorizations of logic and the mind's tools.
Schopenhauer was deeply rigorous in his epistemology.
He categorizes the mind's operational tools into three very distinct specialized techniques. First, there is logic, which he defines strictly as the technique of our own internal thinking. It is the rule book for how we structure our thoughts to ourselves to avoid contradiction.
Second, there is dialectic.
Which is the technique of arguing or disputing with others. It's the martial art of conversation.
And third, there is rhetoric.
The technique of speaking to crowds, of persuading a large audience.
The source material focuses heavily on the first one, logic, because Schopenhauer wants to isolate the absolute foundational laws that govern how we construct any logical argument.
He strips logic down to its chassis. He identifies the primary, inescapable rules of thought. One of the most critical is the law of the excluded middle.
What does that mean in plain terms?
This law dictates that in a logical proposition, a predicate must be either affirmed or denied of a subject. There is no middle ground. There is no gray area in formal logic.
So either a physical object is a tree or it is not a tree. It cannot be sort of a tree in the rigid structure of a logical argument.
Correct. He pairs this with the principle of sufficient reason, which he actually dedicated his entire doctoral dissertation to. This principle asserts that nothing is without a ground or reason why it is. Everything must have a cause, a logical basis, or a motivation.
Now, formal logic can sometimes feel incredibly dry. It feels like doing algebra with words.
It really does.
But Schopenhauer, through the text, uses specific examples of syllogisms to show exactly how mechanical this process is.
A syllogism, for those who might be rusty on their classical rhetoric, is just a formal logical argument composed of three parts.
A major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion drawn from the two.
The text provides several examples to demonstrate how different figures of logic simply sort concepts in different ways. Let's look at the first figure example provided in the source material.
Okay, let's hear it.
The major premise is, no whale is cold-blooded. The minor premise is, all fish are cold-blooded. And the conclusion inescapably follows. Therefore, no fish is a whale.
It is perfectly airtight. It takes the concepts of whale, fish, and cold-bloodedness and reorganizes them to produce a definitive categorization.
But the text doesn't stop there. It shows us how we can shift the arrangement with a third figure example.
The third figure operates by aligning the subjects and predicates differently, often to prove a partial truth rather than a universal negative, right?
Exactly. The example from the text is this. Major premise, all alkali metals float in water. Minor premise, all alkali metals are metals. Conclusion, Therefore, some metals float in water.
Again, flawless logic. We take known facts about alkali metals and use them to draw a broader, specific conclusion about the category of metals in general.
The text even includes a more socially or demographically oriented example to demonstrate that this mathematical structure applies to literally any category of concepts.
Right, the final example in this section.
Yes. Major premise, no Muslim is a Jew. Minor premise, some Turks are Jews. Conclusion, therefore some Turks are not Muslims.
Now, why does Schopenhauer spend so much time meticulously breaking down these syllogisms? What is the philosophical point of proving that fish aren't whales?
It's not to teach us basic logic. He's setting a trap. He is demonstrating the sheer, uncreative, mechanical nature of logic.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Schopenhauer is using these textbook syllogisms as a devastating critique of the limits of reason. He is proving that logic, no matter how rigorous, no matter how infinitely complex the syllogism or the equation, is nothing more than a sorting algorithm.
it is a 19th century version of a database query.
This is the massive plot twist in his epistemology. Logic cannot create anything.
It can't generate anything new.
Never. Schopenhauer's humbling core insight is that logic can never generate genuinely new knowledge about the world. It is strictly a process of clarification, reorganization, and deduction.
It takes the knowledge you already possess, knowledge you must have gathered prior through physical perception, and it just arranges it.
It unpacks the suitcase. It folds the shirts and pairs the socks. But it never, ever puts a new item of clothing into the suitcase.
If you don't already know what a whale is, or what cold-blooded means from studying biology in the physical world, the logic is useless. It's a mill grinding without grain.
To cement this point, Schopenhauer quotes an ancient philosophical maxim. It's a shared insight that acts as a through line, from Aristotle to John Locke to Immanuel Kant. In Latin, the phrase is, nihil est in intellectu, nisi quod ante afferit in sensu.
Nothing is in the intellect that was not previously in the senses.
Every towering logical argument, every brilliant conceptual deduction, every massive system of abstract thought ultimately relies entirely on the raw data we gathered by seeing, touching, suffering, and experiencing the physical world.
If you disconnect logic from perceptual reality, you are just running empty code.
Which brings us to the final, most profound, and frankly most challenging part of our deep dive.
We have dismantled a lot today. If modern reductionist science just chops reality up into meaningless deterministic gears,
And if formal logic is just a sterile sorting algorithm that can't generate new knowledge,
then what is the actual point of philosophy? What is it supposed to do?
Schopenhauer makes a vital, boundary-setting distinction here. He redefines the entire task of philosophy. He argues that true philosophy must completely abandon the search for the causa efficiens.
The efficient cause, meaning the mechanics of exactly how the universe was physically assembled.
Right, and it must also abandon the search for the causa finalis, the final purpose, the grand why of the universe's existence.
Philosophy doesn't ask, why does the world exist, or where did it come from?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Schopenhauer says those questions are fundamentally unanswerable. Instead, true philosophy asks a single, incredibly difficult question. What is the world?
What is the world? It's the ultimate attempt to just clearly see what is right in front of us. What am I looking at?
Yes. And by restricting philosophy to asking what, Schopenhauer launches a massive, scathing critique of materialism.
Materialism is the philosophical view that only physical matter exists, and that everything else, including human consciousness, emotion, and thought, is merely a byproduct, an epiphenomenon of moving matter.
It's the ultimate reductionist dream. Mind is just meat.
Schopenhauer mocks this mercilessly.
He points out a glaring logical contradiction at the heart of materialism. The materialist tries to derive the entire universe, including consciousness, from the object, from matter itself, but they completely ignore the absolute necessity of the subject.
The perceiver.
Matter, as we understand it, only exists as a representation to a conscious mind. Without a mind to perceive space, time, and mass, the concept of matter is entirely meaningless.
You cannot explain the existence of the mind by pointing to matter, because matter relies on the mind to be perceived in the first place.
He has a wonderfully condescending insult for this exact brand of physicalist arrogance in the text. He calls materialism barber and apothecary apprentice philosophy.
It is a devastating phrase. By calling it apprentice philosophy, he is saying it is intellectually immature.
It is a childishly innocent, naive view of reality. The materialist genuinely naively believes that moving chunks of physical matter are the ultimate thing in itself.
They think that if they just look closely enough at the atoms, if they build a powerful enough microscope, they will eventually find the soul of the universe hiding between the electrons.
He compares these highly specialized reductionist scientists to people obsessed with looking at the microscopic details of dirt. He critiques the microscopic researchers of his day with immense venom.
What does he say about them?
He says these scientists will happily spend their entire lives hunched over microscopes, meticulously studying every tiny, disgusting anatomical detail of intestinal worms and parasites. They will catalog every microscopic fiber of a beetle's leg.
But he says if someone steps back from the microscope and speaks of the core of nature, the underlying metaphysical reality of existence that unites all these fragmented pieces, these same researchers plug their ears.
They ignore it. They just go right back to looking at their worms.
They are so obsessed with the mechanics of the gears that they are terrified of the concept of time.
Schopenhauer calls these hyper-specialized scientists the uninvited guests of nature. It's a profound image. They are rummaging through nature's trash, cataloging the physical detritus of the universe without ever attempting to understand the homeowner.
They are studying the ink on the page without ever trying to read the poem.
So if the materialists are completely wrong, and we cannot find the meaning of the universe by looking closer at physical matter, can we ever solve the riddle of the world? Can we ever know the ultimate truth?
This is where Schopenhauer establishes the hard, unbreakable limits of human knowledge. He is profoundly intellectually honest here.
He explains that the ultimate reality, the true thing in itself, which again he identifies as the blind striving will, is in its absolute essence forever obscured from us.
Why? If we can perceive the world, why can't we perceive its ultimate origin?
Because of the VR headset. Our minds, by their very biological and cognitive architecture, are forced to process all data through highly specific forms. We can only understand, perceive, and conceptualize things in terms of space, time, and causality.
If something exists entirely outside of space, outside of time, and outside the chain of cause and effect, our brains literally cannot compute it.
It is structurally impossible for human cognition to grasp it.
It would be like trying to run modern 3D software on an abacus. The hardware cannot process the code.
Therefore, Schopenhauer concludes that anyone, any philosopher, any theologian, any scientist who stands up and claims to know exactly how the world was created or how it emanated from a divine source prior to time or what the ultimate purpose of the cosmos is a charlatan and a braggart.
They are claiming to see outside the boundaries of human cognition, which is impossible.
So what does this all mean? If we are permanently trapped inside the headset of space, time, and causality, and we can never know the ultimate origins or the grand why of the universe, what is the point of philosophy? Do we just give up?
Not at all. True philosophy, Schopenhauer argues, doesn't try to explain the origins of the code. It acts as the correct alphabet to decipher the code of the world we do perceive.
It is an act of translation. Philosophy must perfectly harmonize with perceptual reality as we experience it in our daily lives.
It doesn't promise to explain where the universe came from, but it promises to make honest, clear-eyed sense of the universe we are trapped in.
And he measures his own philosophy against the failures of the past to prove this point. The text highlights a few specific targets he uses to show what happens when philosophy tries to force reality to fit abstract concepts, rather than deciphering perceived reality.
He points to several monumental philosophical failures. First, he points to Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz.
Leibniz formulated a massive, conceptually beautiful philosophy of extreme optimism. He famously concluded that because God is perfect, this universe must logically be the best of all possible worlds.
Schopenhauer, the ultimate pessimist, says that Leibniz's entire conceptual cathedral is instantly destroyed by simply opening your front door and observing the undeniable, pervasive reality of human and animal misery.
If your philosophy tells you everything is perfect and your eyes tell you everything is suffering, your philosophy is wrong.
The concept failed the perception test.
Then he points to Baruch Spinoza. Spinoza argued that everything in existence is just a mode of one absolute, infinite divine substance.
Schopenhauer counters that Spinoza's elegant geometry of a unified substance completely contradicts our fundamental, daily, lived experience.
It contradicts our profound existential dread, our bewilderment at our own isolated individual existence, and the sharp divisions we feel between ourselves and others.
And finally, he mentions Christian Wolff.
Wolff built a massive, highly influential rationalist philosophy centered around the concept of logical essence. But Schopenhauer points out that Wolff's deterministic system of essences is flatly contradicted by our innate, undeniable perceptual sense of human moral responsibility and agency.
Leibniz, Spinoza, Wolff, they all built these stunning, logically airtight, perfectly abstract houses, but they built them without foundations.
And the second those houses were exposed to the harsh, violent weather of actual human reality, they collapsed.
Precisely. Schopenhauer boldly claims that his own philosophy, the recognition of the world as a mental representation driven by a blind, striving, fundamentally aimless will, is the only philosophical framework that actually fits the perceived reality of human existence without having to brutally force the pieces together like Procrustes.
His system accounts for the pervasive suffering. It accounts for the endless, restless striving of human ambition. And crucially, it doesn't rely on empty, abstract concepts or manufactured hollow optimism. It is a philosophy of brutal, deciphering honesty.
This has been an incredibly dense, rewarding journey. Let's trace our steps back and summarize exactly what we've unpacked today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started by diagnosing the modern intellectual sickness, the trap of scientific reductionism. We saw how trying to force every complex reality into the iron bed of fundamental physics leaves us trapped in Laplace's meaningless deterministic clockwork.
We then explored Schopenhauer's devastating analogies, learning why the culture of hyperspecialization is so dangerous. We must strive to be the watchmaker who synthesizes knowledge to see the whole, rather than the gearmaker who is master of the microscopic, but ignorant of the meaning.
We recognize the grave danger of building our understanding of the world out of pure, floating, abstract concepts that aren't fiercely grounded in the friction of perceptual reality.
We dismantled the illusion that formal logic can generate new knowledge, realizing it is just a tool for organizing what our senses have already suffered and learned.
And finally, we arrived at the ultimate limits of human understanding. We accepted that while we are neurologically barred from knowing the ultimate origins of the universe, we can actively seek a philosophy that honestly, unflinchingly deciphers the reality we actually experience.
And this is where the theoretical meets the practical for you, our listener. You absolutely do not have to be a 19th century German metaphysician to apply this profound toolkit to your life.
In your daily routine, when you feel that creeping sense of absurdity or burnout, recognize the symptoms. Don't just rely on abstract corporate jargon or empty conceptual goals.
And don't get lost endlessly polishing your tiny, isolated logical gears. Step back from the workbench. Look at your actual perceptual reality. Look at the people around you. Look at the genuine impact of your work. Look at the striving and the suffering in your immediate environment.
Stop trying to find the why in the subatomic particles and start trying to grasp the whole why.
That is the ultimate empowering takeaway. You have permission to look at the whole picture.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over, building directly on the foundation Schopenhauer has laid for us today.
This is a good one.
We spent a significant amount of time discussing how logic and abstract concepts are truly just empty storage containers. They are the Tupperware that must be filled with what we physically perceive through our senses. If we take Schopenhauer seriously on this, then think deeply about our current, overwhelming societal obsession with artificial intelligence.
It's a fascinating connection to make.
We are pouring billions of dollars into building AI systems. And what are those systems made of? They are built entirely, 100%, out of formal logic, mathematical concepts, code, and language models.
They are the ultimate manifestation of the syllogism.
But these systems do not possess a physical, perceiving body. They have no sensory apparatus to experience pain, to suffer desire, to feel the passage of time, or to encounter the friction of the physical world.
According strictly to Schopenhauer's framework, this would mean that artificial intelligence can never, ever actually understand the world as will, the true, striving, suffering essence of reality.
It can only ever endlessly, flawlessly rearrange the empty storage containers of the world as representation.
So the question to leave you with is this: can a machine without a body, without the capacity to suffer, ever possess true sapientia, true wisdom?
Or is it mathematically destined to be nothing more than the ultimate, soulless Genoa gearmaker? It's something heavy to mull over the next time you ask an AI for advice on your life.
It perfectly applies Schopenhauer's 19th century epistemology to the most pressing technological question of the 21st century. Logic without perception is forever blind to meaning.
Don't forget to follow us and subscribe to stay updated on our latest episodes and never miss a step in this odyssey of thought. Until next time, keep questioning.